and welcome to the first of what I'm going to call Flying with TFC. And in this series I will not be flying aircraft, but rather spacecraft. In this case we have the standard DeltaGlider, and for a destination I'm taking a request by Martin Schweiger that he made in a recent comment on a Beyond the Foil episode, that he said he'd like to see a trip to the moon because he'd like to see what's on the dark side. So that's where we're going. Up here in the corner, upper right, you can see the date. I've set this simulation up for August 2nd, 2012. The time is currently a little bit after noon. And let's see, on this display, the map here, the green track is our projected orbit. The yellow track is the moon's orbit around the Earth, and there's the moon's position currently in that track. And on this display it shows the difference between the inclination of what our orbit would be if we took off and head straight ahead and what the moon's orbit is. And right now the difference is 13.19 degrees. We need that difference to be as low as possible. You think of the different planes, like the moon's orbit is on one plane around the Earth at one angle to the Earth, and our orbit is at a different angle, so we'll have to arrange for our orbit to be on the same plane, the same angle as the moon. It will make getting there a lot easier. And so now what I need to do is basically wait, and I've done a few practice runs on this, and I know that I'm going to have to wait until about 1:50 p.m. or so, so I'm going to use time compression to get there a little quicker. You can see this number's coming down, and when it gets to its lowest point it will be time for launch. It's coming down. I believe it'll get to about 7 something, which is not great, but it's easy enough to correct that in orbit. Better. Coming down still. Don't want to speed time up too much or I'll overshoot. And I can't move time backwards. 7.9, 0.7. Okay, real soon that's going to stop going down. .36. .29. I think we're just about as good as it's going to get here. I keep playing with time acceleration and it'll get too high and overshoot. So let's get going here. Now I've worried about the engine sounds. I have edited the sound files for engine thrust and so on to try to bring them down to where they're not going to drown me out like they did in that one first example video or clip or whatever it was. So let's see. We are go for main engine start, so let's just go. Apply a little bit of hover thrust to help the takeoff. Landing gear up. And now pitch up. Cut the hover thrusters and turn to 90 degrees. Ease off on the main engines a little bit. Heading of 90 degrees, we'll level out, straighten, and pitch up into a climb. On course. Climbing like crazy. 5 kilometers altitude and climbing. Go ahead and show our orbit as it's beginning to take shape. Climbing at about 127 meters per second. Kilometers. And we're leaving the Cape behind. Throttle up the main engines all the way. I'd use time compression to speed this up, but with the engines running, that's a really bad idea. Because you'd lose totally lose control of the ship. And I know that because I've done it. Climbing good. We need this number here to reach about 7,500 meters per second, roughly speaking, to achieve a stable orbit. Our altitude at that point will be about 120 kilometers. Getting dark out there. Starting to approach the edge of space. Climb rate, 35 kilometers altitude. Gimbal the engines a little bit for a little more up pitch. orbit from Earth, at least through the atmosphere, is probably the hardest part about making the trip. And also the noisiest, I have to admit. Okay, we have a good ascent going here. And looking good all the way around. Our flight path is starting to take the shape of an orbit. We do need this point to get outside the gray circle. The gray circle represents the surface of the Earth. And we need this number here to be positive 120 kilometers. That's our periapsis, the lowest point of the orbit. Okay, 45-kilometer altitude, 2,500 kilometers per second, 2.5 kilometers per second, whatever that is. Adjust this. Get this angle, relative inclination angle down a little bit. More of that I can fix on the way up, the less I'll have to fix once I'm in orbit. Kilometers. We're almost halfway to orbit. Meters per second and climbing or accelerating. Relative inclination is coming down. That's good. It's a lot better than it was when we lifted off. Profile's looking good. 72 kilometers and climbing, 5,100 meters per second. Need to center the engine gimbals. want to pitch too high. Very good, very good. We're almost out of the thickest part of the atmosphere. You can tell the engine exhaust isn't showing much now. Time to gradually pitch down a little bit. Altitude. Periapsis is still below the surface of the Earth. Pitch down some more. And focus on bringing that up. Starting to fill out. Our orbit is going to end up being kind of elliptical, but that's okay. I don't expect to remain in orbit very long. Begin throttling back. Periapsis is almost positive. Now it's positive. 24 kilometers, 30, 41, 46, 50. Look for 120 and cut the engines. '87. 97. 116. 120. Okay, the noisiest part of the trip is over. At least the longest noisy part of the trip is over. We are in orbit. Our altitude is 180 kilometers. The highest part of the orbit is 182 kilometers. The lowest part is 120, which means our entire orbit is now high enough to be out of the thickest part of the atmosphere, high enough above the atmosphere, in fact, that it will not be having any kind of atmospheric drag effect on the ship. Okay, now switch the HUD over to orbit mode and go ahead and turn prograde, which means to face in the direction that we're moving. Have a look outside. Looking good. Alright, let's see. Yeah, here we are over the mid-Atlantic. Okay, now align the orbital plane, and basically in 1400 seconds we will turn the ship to a right angle to the plane of our orbit and fire the main engines to bring this number down to 0. Okay. And now I'll go ahead and warp time ahead to get to that point, or get close to it. Close. Alright, now go ahead and let's see, that's the descending node, which means we will have to turn orbit normal plus. And that's going to put the ship facing in a direction that will have us pointing at a right angle to the direction of our flight. And it looks like we're over Africa. Yeah, I think so. Alright, so our orbit direction is going towards, well, if there was a line there going through in the direction, it would be like the direction I'm facing is the direction the ship is actually moving. And we're going to thrust at a right angle to that to change this number, relative inclination 6.6 degrees right now. We'll be doing this to bring that number down to 0. And let's see, we're 100 seconds out from ignition. Warp time ahead just a little bit. And when this number gets to half of what this one is, about roughly 25 seconds is when we'll fire. Okay, 4 seconds. 1, go. And you can see the relative inclination coming down. Which means our orbit is lining up with the moon's orbit. That makes getting there a whole lot easier. Close. Point 3, 0.1, 0.02. Not bad. Actually, you almost couldn't ask for better than that. Go ahead and face prograde. Our orbit is now on the same plane as the moon. Now, set up a transfer orbit to get from Earth to the moon. Set up a hypothetical orbit. Start adding in delta V. I know it's going to take in the neighborhood of 3,000 meters per second delta V. Delta V is change in velocity. And we'll be increasing our velocity by in the neighborhood of 3,000 meters per second. Okay, starting to get up there. Okay, the dashed ellipse is our hypothetical orbit if we were to fire now. And now, let's see, move the ejection angle by bringing the date forward. Basically, the dashed green line is our position in our orbit when we fire the engines. The dashed yellow or brownish, whatever color line that is where the moon will be when we reach the moon's orbit. We need this and this to overlap. And it looks like they do. Let's fine-tune this a little bit now. Basically, the ejection angle buttons I'm using here pretty much tell when we're going to go, and DV is delta V, which is how much increase in velocity we'll need to do it. Getting there. It's kind of a back and forth thing. Advance the date, increase the delta V. Trying to do it that way to use a minimum amount of fuel. There we are. So when our orbit position comes around to meet this in 5,900 seconds, we'll fire the engines. We will run the engines to increase our velocity by 3,079 meters per second, and that will put us on course for the moon. And now I'm going to go ahead and warp time ahead till we get to that point, because nobody really wants to sit here for an hour and a half to almost 2 hours waiting for us to get in position to go. Time compression is very handy. All right, less than 2 minutes, less than 1 minute. Turn off time compression and face the ship prograde. All right. Coming into position, just in time, 15 seconds to thrust. And this will be what NASA calls the translunar injection burn. Because when the burn is finished, we will be on course for the moon. And firing. This display over here, you'll watch as the DV number goes down, a solid green ellipse will come out and overlay this dashed green one, and the solid green will be our actual orbit. And when the two match up, we're on course. I've done ran this flight in like 4 or 5 practice runs, and in 2 of them I managed to get there without even having to make a mid-course correction, which I found to be unusual, because when NASA was going to the moon, they would usually make 2 or even 3 mid-course corrections. This whole thing takes me back to the late 1960s, the Apollo missions, Apollo 7, Apollo 8, the Apollo 9 trips around the moon, and then finally, of course, Apollo 11, July 20th, 1969. I stayed up late that night and watched the landing, the first EVA on the moon. You don't forget something like that, and it's still impressive, even though they stopped doing it a long time ago. Personally, I think they should never have stopped. I think we should have a permanently manned base up there now. We could. We have the technology. The trick is getting the bean counters to agree to pay for it. Ellipse is starting to get big enough to actually see it on the display now. And it'll start growing faster as the burn gets near the end. I know a lot of the rest of the display is changing, but the green ellipse is the main thing. That and the delta V number. Okay, not bad. Overshot just a little bit, but I can use translation thrusters to correct it. Perfect. Dead zeros. Okay. Have a look outside. Let's see. Yeah, that's Africa again, I think. No, it's South America, maybe. I'd have to actually look at the map display to know for certain, but that's what it looks like. And of course it would figure that here we are coming around as we're going on to the night side of the planet. Let's see, just for grins, let's have a look at the map display. Let's see. No, that wasn't South America, it's Africa. This is South America. There's the Africa. Okay. Alright. Alright. So, I don't need that, but I do. Here's our orbit shape, and here's our projection. It lines up exactly with our prediction. And so, it's, let's see, August 2nd. It is now almost 4 p.m., 2012. The trip to the moon generally takes, I believe, 3 to 3.5 days or so. And let's see. Let's look on here. Alright, our main fuel, we started with 12,900 kilograms of fuel. We have 4,559 left, which is easily enough to do mid-course corrections and, of course, a braking burn when we get to the moon to put ourselves in lunar orbit. And that's the goal for this mission, by the way, is to achieve a good, stable lunar orbit. I do not intend to attempt landing because, frankly, I've never tried it. Well, I take that back. I did try it once, and I crashed and burned. badly. So I need to practice landings before I try to actually do one for real, so to speak. Well, okay, it's not for real, but you know what I mean. To do one live while recording. Now we'll advance time. Let's see, 10x, 100x, 1000x. Let's back that off a little bit. You can see city lights on the Earth. And it's getting smaller as we pull away. And let's have a look at our instruments. See, we are here on the orbit, and we need to get out there. So we've got quite a ways to go yet. And as we go, this number here, the G number, that is the gravitational force of the Earth and the percent of its effect on the ship. And once that number reaches about, I want to say about 48 or 49, 0.48 or 0.49, we will stop the time compression and assess whether or not we need to do a mid-course correction. Advance time 10,000x. Otherwise this really would take 3 days. Alright, let's have a look here. Actually, it looks pretty much like we're okay right now. I'm going to advance time again. A little bit more. Alright, now at this point I'm going to change the reference on this orbit so that we're referencing the moon. Now the little gray circle in the middle is the moon. This line indicates our position along this curve, which is our orbit, which currently is going to approach in here, get close to the moon, and then fling us back over towards Earth. And when we about here is when we'll do a braking burn to slow down and actually enter into a lunar orbit. Okay, time's still at 100x. Let's go back to 1000 and 10,000x. Back to 1000, back to 100. Alright, time compression off. Okay. Lunar periapsis is currently 6,000 kilometers. Not exactly what we want. Alright, update the HUD. We are now in close enough for the ship to consider us to be in lunar orbit. We're not yet, but we will be. Let's see. Go ahead and turn prograde. I want to get this PEA, the periapsis number, down lower. For the moon, a good periapsis would be, say, 20 kilometers. It's like the highest mountains on the moon are about 10 or 11 kilometers, so if you're flying at 20, you're above everything. And since there's no atmosphere to speak of there, you don't have to worry about aerodynamic drag or anything like that. Okay, we will be at current PET in 13,000 seconds. I don't know exactly what that is. I know it's 3,600 seconds for an hour. So if you do the math, it looks like about 3 or 4 hours. And I'm just saying it off the top of my head. I didn't do the math. Okay, I'm going to, let's see, rotate the ship 90 degrees this way till we're facing 270. And it should only take just a quick burst of the main engines to bring that periapsis down. Basically, well, let me get in position. Okay, almost there. Okay, so we're facing 270. This will be alright. Basically what I'm going to do is thrust the engines facing out this way, away from that line, and that will push this orbit in this way towards the moon's surface. And that's what we're aiming for, is to bring the periapsis, which is this solid circle here, down. And it's coming down. We're down to 4.5 thousand kilometers. So by doing this correction burn here, we don't have to use near as much fuel as if we waited down until we were down here to do it. $2,000. $940. See, I might be able to get the rest of it with translation thrusters. The main engines actually put out too much power to be precise, at least for this maneuver. Because at the distance we are now, a small change made here has a large effect on the other end. Okay, 29 kilometers, that looks good. Go ahead and turn prograde. We are on course. We have a nice low periapsis. The apoapsis right now is not available because the eccentricity of our orbit is greater than 1. Once we get that in the braking burn, that eccentricity will go down, get to a number below 1, and we will then officially be in lunar orbit. Okay, we have 12,000 seconds to waste, so let's accelerate time. I made a mistake. That was a bad thing to do. Never accelerate time when the engines are running. That is an awful mistake. You see what it did to the control that I actually didn't have. I've had times when doing that would send the ship into a spin that you can never recover from. And plus, if the engines are running when you go into time acceleration, you'd be surprised how fast you can run out of fuel. And there are no gas stations out here. 9,000 seconds. 7,000. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, map. Reference the moon. And there we go. Get this down. And when we reach periapsis, we'll face retrograde and do a deceleration burn. Okay, less than 5 minutes. Face retrograde. Well, there's the dark side of the moon. You know something? I think we should have brought flashlights. I don't see a thing. I don't know. Once we get into orbit, we'll take another look. Certainly nobody's got any lights on down there. Okay, 32 seconds. Fire retrograde burn. About 15 seconds out. So in 5 seconds. And here you'll see this arc. The green line will close in and form an orbit. Really elliptical at first, and then we'll get it start to circularize. We're in orbit. Now we'll shrink that down and make it a little more circular. Watching the apoapsis. I'd like it to make it close to the periapsis. We are in orbit. The high point is, let's see, turn that off, 46 kilometers. The low point is 15 kilometers. Not bad. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the moon. The dark side of the moon. And sadly, I think really we should have brought some really big flashlights, because I don't see a blasted thing down there. Okay, we have arrived in lunar orbit Monday, August the 6th at 1:06 a.m. 2012. Welcome to the moon. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the simulation state in this condition and perhaps revisit it sometime to attempt a landing after I've learned how and had a chance to master it a little bit. We still have 3,940 kilograms of fuel remaining, so there's easily enough fuel to do the landing. So that's not bad. I'm going to warp time ahead a little bit now. Get around to the daylight side where maybe we have a chance of seeing something. Well, there isn't really much to see. Back off the zoom here. I'm not up on lunar geography, so I can't look at anything here and point out features. I wish I could. 30 years ago I could have looked at this thing and pointed out at least 3 lunar landing sites, but not today. Okay. We're in the orbit. I'm going to save the simulation in this state, and someday we'll return to it and attempt a landing at Brighton Beach Base. That's it for this flight. We'll be sure to fly again sometime soon. Take it easy.